I want to start this morning with a picture. And when you look at this picture, not this one, but the next one, this one right here, I want you to think, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? What comes to your mind when you see this picture? Some of you have family right now or coworkers that are traveling to Florida, or they're already there. Maybe they had a beach day and you're thinking about them. There's a big group of them that have been going to Busch Gardens and the beach and doing all this other stuff while we stay home and work. It's not fair, right? So some of you may be thinking about them. Some of you may be thinking about summer vacation plans. Maybe you have a beach trip coming up that you're thinking of, or some other trip, but it makes you think of vacation and relaxation. And maybe some of you are just wishing that you were there right now instead of here. I won't judge you for that. Maybe a little bit, but not much. For me, when I see this, the first thought that goes through my head is, boy, do I hate sand. I just really do. Like, I look at this and I have a hard time enjoying the view. I have a hard time imagining relaxing on the beach. I look at her feet and his legs and I think, I hate that feeling. Like, I am not much of a beach person, to be honest. And this started off as a very young child. I liked going to the beach, but I learned very early on that I don't like sand. My earliest memory of going to the beach was when I was probably preschool age, and we would go to Ocean City, Maryland. Anyone ever been to Ocean City, Maryland? Yeah? Good handful. Like, we're definitely back on the East Coast now. Back west, they had no idea what I was talking about. I actually just saw this was one of the most overrated cities. It was linked as that, but that's not fair because there was a boardwalk and there's a beach. But I remember as a kid, we would go there a lot of summers, and the earliest memory I have of going to Ocean City, Maryland, was I was very little, preschool, like I said, and I remember going there and just thinking the waves were huge. In my small child mind's eye, this was like being at Hawaii. These were the great big surfs that you see people ride and get crushed under. And I remember going out into the ocean just thinking I was endangering my life, which maybe I was because I was so small. And a big wave came and took me over, and I remember somersaulting under that water. And as I was somersaulting underneath, I remember my swimming trunks acted like a shovel, like a scoop, and with every churn, it was dragging along the bottom of the ocean floor and picking up a load of sand. And we had to walk to our hotel or the condo that we were staying at, and I remember the discomfort of having a pair of swimming trunks that were just loaded with sand. And I thought, why do people like this? And it hasn't gotten any better. Like, as I've gotten older, I've actually disliked sand more. Like, there's a side of me that kind of likes going to the beach, but I'm always thinking about the sand that just sticks on you. And it doesn't make it better once you have kids, because the sand's sticking on them. And it's not just about the discomfort of the sand. It's also, you know, that we're going to bring a whole load of it into the car. Like, there's no way around it. It's going to be in the car. It's going to get in the house when you get home. You're going to find it in the bottom of your laundry machine. And then there's like these moments where I still think, okay, it's kind of romantic, right? Like, there's this kind of like, this special thing about the beach, and I'll be out there and I'll think, it would feel great to go running on the beach. Because you see that in the movies, right? And you'll see people there at the beach running carefree. And even just this summer, I had that moment, I thought, you know what, I should run on the beach. And I went barefoot running on the beach. And about a mile in, I think I developed a hot spot. And by the time I got back, I had blisters on my feet. And I'm like, I hate sand. I just don't like it. And so when we get to the text that we're looking at this morning, which you'll recognize very clearly, it's the story of the wise man and the foolish man. And the wise man built his house on the rock. Did someone say the sand? I just told you how much I dislike sand. The wise man built his house on the rock, but the foolish man built his house on the sand. And I say, yes, that's a very foolish thing, because who wants to live right there in the sand? I was talking with third and fourth graders about this week, and they were imagining, well, maybe this person just liked the view. I'm like, yeah, but clearly they haven't had to clean up after someone's been at the beach, and it all gets drug into the house. But nonetheless, I'm digressing from the point of the story. Let's turn to Matthew chapter 7. As we go to Matthew chapter 7, I challenge you to try to read this without singing it in your head, because it'll be stuck in your head all day long, I promise you. It's already been in mine all week long, but I'm making it. Chapter 7, Matthew chapter 7, starting with verse 24. Anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents, see, I almost said though the rain comes down. I'm ready to start singing this song. I can't not sing the song when I read this. Though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise and the winds beat against the house, it won't collapse because it is built on bedrock. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish, like a person who builds a house on sand. When the rains and the floods come and the winds beat against the house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, for he taught with real authority, quite unlike their teachers of religious law. Now, the first thing I want you to notice is, who is it that we're talking about? Who is Jesus talking about when he's talking about the wise man and the foolish man? Naturally, my first thought is, well, I think we're part of the wise group, right? Like we always think of the wise man, like those are the people who follow Jesus, and the foolish man is someone who's gone off onto a different route. The foolish man is someone who's doing something different with their lives, who hasn't chosen to align their lives with Jesus. But you'll notice that there's similarities here between these two people. First of all, their lives are aligned. They both have the same objective. They both have the same goal. They both want to build a house. They're on the same trajectory. The other thing that you'll notice is when Jesus opens it up, who's the wise man? The wise man is the person who listens to my teaching and follows it, or who hears my teaching and follows it. But who's the foolish man? It's like a person, or it's the person who hears my teaching but doesn't obey it. In other words, what Jesus is saying is, this group right here, the wise man and the foolish man, are the people who are listening to my message. It's the people who are hearing my voice and then deciding what to do with that. And the context that we're hearing this story is this is part of the Sermon on the Mount. This is the closing of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus has gone through his whole teachings. We were spending weeks on this earlier this year, just the other month. He's been going through these teachings, these hard teachings, and he closes it with this line right here: the wise man and the foolish man. The wise man is the one who hears my words and does them, and the foolish one is the one who hears them and doesn't do them. In other words, when we're trying to apply this to ourselves today, the first thing that we have to be aware of is that Jesus is talking about us. He's talking about which category do those of us who listen to the words of Jesus, those of us who hear the teachings of Jesus, which category do you fall into? And it's made even more clear when you look at the context of the story, because just before that, before he ends with this story, is a really disturbing one in verse 21, where he says, "Not everyone who calls out to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter into the kingdom of heaven. Only those who actually do the will of my Father in heaven will enter." And so this is the context of leading up to this story, as Jesus is saying, people who say that they're my followers, people who say that they're living their life this way, they may be surprised at the end to realize that they're actually not my followers. So who are the wise people? The wise people are the ones who listen to my teachings. But more than listening to my teachings, they go beyond that and they actually follow them. They adopt them. So suddenly when you look at it from that frame of reference, the story becomes kind of sobering and really important. Because the question is, which category do I find myself in? Am I finding myself aligning my life in a way of wisdom, or do I find myself even as a quote-unquote follower of Jesus, living a life that's actually kind of foolish? And the results are really important because the results are very different. It starts off the same. They start off building a house. They start off with the same goal, the same objective, but it ends very different. The other thing to notice about the story that's really critical is that the storm comes to everyone, right? The story isn't the storm may come, or the wise man built his house on the rock just in case a storm would come. But when the storms come, and I feel like this is the first lesson that we need to identify with and wrestle with, is that as followers of Jesus, storms will come. Even if you're not a follower of Jesus, storms will come. Living in the world that we live in, there will be storms. Of course, we know this, right? Like we know we can see that this is clear in the Bible. There's all kinds of different passages you can look at One that comes to mind is Luke chapter 13. I'll just turn there real quick. Luke chapter 13, because this is a kind of a thing that Jesus had to wrestle with in his time, where people felt like if something bad happened to you, that was a clear sign that you weren't a follower of Jesus or follower of God. It says this: about this time, Jesus was informed that Pilate had murdered some people. That's a significant storm. Had murdered some people from Galilee as they were offering sacrifices at the temple. Do you think those Galileans were worse sinners than all the other people from Galilee, Jesus asked? Is that why they suffered? Not at all. And you will perish too, unless you repent of your sins and turn to God. And what about the 18 people who died when the tower in Siloam fell on them? Were they the worst sinners in Jerusalem? So Jesus is making it pretty clear, right? That no, like things happen. Bad things happen in the world around you. It doesn't matter if you're close with God or not close with God, storms will come. You will have things come that will challenge your life. You will have things come that will rock your world. You will have losses in your life. You'll have things to mourn in your life. There will be storms that will come. And I think this is one of these things that we kind of know doctrinally, right? Like if we were to say, like, open up the Bible and say, what do you think? If you're following God, will life work out magically for you? Like, do you believe in the gospel of prosperity, for example? And I think all of us in this room would say, no, like we don't believe that. Yet at the same time, emotionally, I feel like sometimes we go through that or identify with this idea a little bit differently. I mean, have you ever had something go wrong in your life and then you ask God why? Like you felt like you did all the right things. You felt like you were playing by the rules. You felt like you were honoring God with your money or your time or your life, and things kind of started to fragment. We ask that question, don't we? We ask the question, why? Like, why would God let this thing happen? Why would he let life unfold when I've been working to do the right thing? You see, sometimes I feel like as a church, we sometimes push a narrative that makes it a little bit difficult to wrestle with life, because we'll push something like when we talk about tithes and offerings. You've heard this before, and I probably said this before, right? If you are willing to tithe your dollars first, if you're willing to give of your resources, he's going to do what? He's going to bless you. And we believe that, and there's evidence for that in the Bible, but then sometimes we say that, and when you do give of your resources, and yet you're still struggling to make the payment on your home, and you're still struggling to hold that job, then you start to really question, like, well, I thought that if I did this, life would work out different. And so there's there's one thing to believe something intellectually and to believe that storms will come to all of us, but it's another thing to emotionally go through those things and question, why are they happening the way that they do? And God makes it pretty clear here in this story, as this representative group of followers of Jesus, that the storms come to us as well. And the storms do damage. Now, I don't have to tell you this, do I? Because here we live in a very stormy state. I have been enjoying storms over this last year because on the West Coast, in Washington specifically, we get a lot of rain, like way too much rain, just rain all the time. But we don't get good storms, and I kind of miss good storms being out there. And so coming out here, we've had some really ruckus storms, and it's kind of fun. My kids were glued the other week. I don't know how long ago it was, 3 weeks ago or so now. They were glued watching to the window, watching it like it was television as the thunder rolled and the wind was whipping around and the trees were just kind of bending and swaying, and the rain was just coming down in sheets. And it was showing me some gutter work that I need to do because it was spilling right over the gutter like a waterfall. It was just amazing, the amount of water. But that can do some damage, can't it? If you don't have things built properly, if your gutters aren't working properly, it can do some damage to your house or to your building. I don't have to tell you that because right over here, we had a surprise leak into the church. Right there and right there. And in a classroom back there, and we needed to bring some people out to clean up afterwards because it was smelling very ripe afterwards. And I remember when there was a class that was doing worship class in here when we were having some significant rain, and it was starting to leak, and they called me over to look at it, and I went over to this door, and I was watching where the rain was coming from, and I expected that was going to be coming through the door. but it was coming from like above the door, showing us that we need to seal something from the outside. It was dripping through the wall onto the door, then onto the carpet. And I remember thinking to myself, I am so fortunate that this didn't happen at my house. And it didn't that day. The next day I go to home and I'm standing in, we had like that second storm that waved through, I think it was on Friday. And I'm standing there and I'm watching the wind outside, and I'm standing by the front door when I look down at my feet and I see a puddle growing around my feet. And I realized I was having the exact same kind of leak. The wind was blowing this time in a way it hadn't blown before. It was pushing through the door a little bit, but I even saw in the same way that was dripping through that door, dripping through my house frame, like above the door. And I realized that's something that needs to be fixed because it can do a lot of damage. Water can cause all kinds of headaches in a house, and you need to address that, hopefully when you build it, but then if not, come back and make some repairs to make sure that doesn't happen again, because it will do a lot of damage. Well, the same thing happens in life. In life, when storms come through, there's damage that can be done. Sometimes it's from the personal storm that you go through. Sometimes it's through the societal storm that you're going through. But you will see consequences oftentimes if things are not prepared well. So I'm thinking about this in light of church, because over the last year, the church has weathered a number of different storms. I was reading a report from Barna where they were looking at how it has affected church over the last year. And I want to throw this up on the screen here. It's going to be hard for you to read, so I'll just interpret it for you. The top one, if you can see that, 35%, are people who are still and only attending their pre-COVID church. So the COVID situation, we're going way back to like early 2020 or 2019, and that top group are people who are like, I'm still connected there. I'm still, like, this is the faithful church that I belong to. I am regularly connecting, whether that's online or in person, whatever, this is my church service. Down there below that, you have people, the 14% of people who've switched churches. This is like some kind of preference. Sometimes this is online, like you suddenly realize when things go online, wow, there's some better preachers out there, so I'm going to go over here, and maybe you're connecting online. Sometimes it's a preference where your in-person situation is different and you're going to a church that feels safer, or you're going to a church that's more relaxed based on your personal preference. But the number that I'm most interested in is the one down below that. 32% of people, church attenders, those who were committed to their church going at least once a month prior to COVID, 32% have stopped attending church completely during COVID, which is kind of, there's been a lot of study about this, about why has church attendance declined so much during COVID, and will it change? Will people start coming back when things come and turn out to be a little bit different? But the truth is that this is only showing what they've been seeing happening for a long time. There's another study this is from a Gallup article that I read back in March. This came out, March 21. And they were saying that this year, for the first time ever in America, the membership of people who are attending some kind of house of worship has for the first time dropped below the 50% mark. This is talking about any kind of house of worship, whether you're connecting to a Christian, to a mosque, whatever it is. Only less than 50%, only 47% of Americans belong to a church, a synagogue, or a mosque, whereas back in 1999, it was 70% of Americans were attending some kind of worship on a regular basis. So clearly, there has been something happening that has been deteriorating the connection to people's faith. And I want to be careful not to just say that church attendance or whatever kind of attendance is indicative of your spiritual condition, right? Like, it likely is, but it's not necessarily tied to that. There's all kinds of reasons that someone may have pulled back from a faith community that they're in. But clearly, when you see numbers like that, from 70% to below 50%, there is something that is happening. And this year, there's been a lot happening. There's a magazine that I came across. It's called World Magazine. It's a Christian publication. And I'm going to read some excerpts from it. It says, the year 2020 has been a brutal, perfect storm of a pandemic, a contentious election, racial unrest, financial troubles, and rampant conspiracy theories. It's been a particularly treacherous time for church leaders to navigate when members split over issues like face masks. You've never heard of that, have you? People get along with everything around everywhere. But it's not just about masks, because political and ideological tensions within churches aren't anything new. But pastors say that this year, each conflict, whether it's over mask mandates, Black Lives Matter, or presidential politics, overlaps with others in a confounding Venn diagram. And this is a quote from one of the pastors. It says, "It doesn't seem like there's any conversation that's disconnected from conflict in some way. In a sense, we're playing whack-a-mole and trying to deal with all of these conflicts at the same time, and it doesn't matter where you land, someone is always unhappy." And he goes on to talk about one couple in California doesn't think that their church takes coronavirus seriously enough. Another family in Texas left because they thought their church restricted things too much. It doesn't matter where it is, there will always be some kind of conflict. And here's the thing, like you've heard this story so many times. I've talked to so many friends from all over places in the States, and things have been fractured in the church community. But it's not because of what's happening right now, is it? It's not, because when we look at this story, when we look at the wise man and the foolish man, the story isn't that the storm came and the wise man rushed outside and started collecting sandbags and made some emergency preparations to deal with the storm the way things were going. No. The only reason his house survived in the storm is because of what he did before the storm. It doesn't matter what you're doing in the storm if you haven't made any kind of preparation before the storm comes. And I'm convinced that the fractures that we've seen in the church community, whether it's local or national, the frictions that we see in families as people split over different kinds of divides, all of this is indicative not of what's happening in the present moment, but ways that we haven't prepared ourselves to be in this present moment. There's another quote here from that same article. This is from the pastor Chuck Bauer. He's a pastor in North Carolina. He says, "We're going through storms like we've never seen before, but our anchor is the Lord. An anchor doesn't guarantee there won't be storms, but it holds fast." It's the question we have to ask ourselves when we go through any kind of storm in life. The question isn't how we deal with this particular storm that we're facing. The question is, are we anchored in Christ? Have we found a way to be unshakable no matter what comes at us in life? No matter what kind of disagreements we have with people, no matter what kind of trials we face, no matter what kind of storms come our way, are we anchored in Christ? So, going back to the story, we have the wise man and the foolish man, and one builds his house on a firm foundation. I used to always wonder, why did this guy do it, build on the sand versus this guy on the rock? Now it seems a lot clearer. The older you get and the more kind of jobs you have working with land, the more you realize, well, this actually makes a lot of sense, right? If you want to build your house in a hurry, if you want to do it the easy way, it's going to be a lot faster, I imagine, to build your house in the sand. And I say this because when we go to the beach, and I do go with my kids to the beach, I'm selfless enough that way that we still go to the beach sometimes. And when we go to the beach, what's the first thing the kids want to do? Either jump in the water or dig in the sand. And you've probably been there before. And this is the real parental love, is when you let them bury you in the sand, because that's not comfortable ever. That's never fun for anyone except for the one doing the burying. The other person just sacrifices themselves in Christian love in that moment. But why do kids like doing this? Why do they like digging in the sand and sculpting the sand? It's because it's fast and it's easy. I've never once came across a kid who's out in some rocky field slaving away to dig a hole, because it's not fun, right? Have you ever had to dig a hole in rocky land? Maybe you're building a fence, maybe you're building something, you have to dig out some area. Nobody enjoys that. It takes sweat, it takes labor, it's difficult. But you go to the sand and things clear away. Things move through easily. You can get a lot of progress done in just a little bit of time. And I imagine if you're wanting to build a house, that can be a tempting thing to find some sand that you can clear away easily to build your house on. In other words, We are a people that like fast results. We like immediate gratification. Let me show you a picture of another guy here. This guy has not helped me with this. Not that guy. We'll get to him in a second. This guy, there's the guy. Jeff Bezos. Has anyone else found that you've become less patient because of this guy's influence in your life? Amazon, the guy who created Amazon. You know, I have gotten to this bad place where I don't know how many of you are Prime subscribers, but you go online to order something and you have that 2-day delivery, and every once in a while you're surprised with the one, and you're like, yeah, this is amazing. But I have a bad reaction when it takes longer than 2 days. If it spills into 3 days, do you get really impatient? I get really frustrated. Like, it said 2 days. It was supposed to be here. Back to the storms, when the flooding came, the deliveries stopped happening altogether. Our road was flooded, and they stopped delivering to our house. And I was waiting over a week for Amazon items to arrive. And that was very frustrating. I can't tell you how angering that is when you're expecting 2-day delivery. We just get used to this idea. And then they have the promise of the drone deliveries happening where it'll be same day, maybe a couple hour delivery. That will blow my mind, but it'll also be really bad for my spiritual health, I think. Because I'm getting to a place where I just really like to have things fast. I have made choice. I prefer to have physical books over electronic, like Kindle books. But I can't tell you how many times I've chosen to buy a Kindle book instead simply because I want it right now. I can't imagine having to wait 2 days for a book to arrive, so I order it and I have it in that moment. That's what I like. I like fast results. And we all like it for a lot of different things. There's the financial fast results that we want to have. And so people have made killings with how to get rich quick books, right? Like, it's almost kind of it's a cliche at this point, but we still fall for it in some kind of way, this idea that we're going to get ahead faster than everyone else. Yet you never met someone who followed quick schemes and actually succeeded, right? But yet we still have a pulling towards we want to have fast results. Or go back to this beautiful picture of this man here. The results that this guy's, I don't know what that kind of face is, but the results he's promising is that you don't have to actually exercise to get the cut abs that you want, right? Like, you can have a muscular physique while eating Cheetos and watching TV. All you have to do is slap this. This is an electronic thing that shocks your stomach, or you can put it on your biceps as well to grow your biceps, supposedly. And you can sit there on your couch doing nothing while it carves out your abs. I'm guessing this probably doesn't work that great, right? But it sounds way better than having to do the hard work of adjusting my diet and getting up and doing crunches or something like that. I would rather have an easy solution that would take care of the things that I want to happen. This is just part of our life, right? But I think we all know that this doesn't work. We all know that the things that we most value, the things that are most important to us, are going to take some time. The things that we value the most will take our attention. It's going to take our care. It's going to take, dare I say it, hard work to get things out of life that we really care about. So the question is, if that's how life works, generally speaking, if the things that I really value, I have to invest in to get out of them what I want, why would it not be the same with our spiritual lives? Why would our spiritual lives not require a great investment where we're willing to do the hard work and the toil and the labor to see the results that we want to have? And I see that difference between the wise man and the foolish man is the wise man's willing to deal with this hard rock foundation. He's willing to deal with the work that it takes to set up a proper foundation to build a house upon. Are we willing to invest like that in our lives? And I know sometimes we get a little bit allergic to this idea. Like, whenever we talk about work and spirituality, especially those of us that grew up in a more legalistic age, we get kind of allergic to that. Like, I thought that grace or that salvation came through grace. I thought it was just a gift from God, and it is. Super clear in that. We can go through the passages. Ephesians chapter 2, salvation is a gift from God, not by works, so that no man can boast. Yet at the same time, there's other passages, right? There's the passage by Paul that we should work out our salvation with fear and trembling. This idea that we actually should be thinking about this and working towards it. Or how about this one? I'll turn to this one. Go to Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 24 to 27. This is always one of my favorites. Don't you realize that in a race, everyone runs, but only one person gets the prize? So run to win. All athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal prize. So I run with purpose in every step. I am not just shadow boxing. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should. Otherwise, I fear that after preaching to others, I myself might be disqualified. I feel like Paul is so ahead of himself when he writes this, because if we ever understand someone who's willing to go through sacrifice and hard labor, it's athletes of today, right? Like this is clearly, if you want to perform well, you're going to put a lot of work into this. You're going to put effort into it. You're going to put care into it. You're going to think about the things that you eat. You're going to think about the types of workouts that you do. You're going to be thinking about whether it's appropriate, the kind of workout that you're doing for the kind of sport that you want to play in or do. Why do we not treat spirituality in the same kind of way? Sure, salvation is a gift from God, but are we willing to work with God in that? Are we willing to invest in our spiritual lives? And I'm not just simply talking about having your quiet time, though that would be an appropriate takeaway from this passage. But more than that, are we willing to allow Jesus' words to challenge us and to actually impact the way that we live? Again, I remind you, when we look at this text, we're looking at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus gives some challenging words about how to live, some challenging words about how to deal with the enemies that we have, some challenging words about going the extra mile, some challenging words about dealing with our interior lives rather than just simply worrying about our external lives. And the question is, are we willing to allow God to do work in our lives? Are we willing to invest in these things to allow it to actually conform us? You know, it's funny, I think particularly as Adventists, this falls on us in a particular kind of way, because we've always believed that God's commands are still important, right? I mean, this is one of the things that we point to. We go to Revelation, it talks about how the remnant church will be those who follow the commands of Jesus. And we'll say, well, look here, we did that, didn't we? Because we're here today. And that's the commandment that says to honor God and worship him on the seventh day. And so we continue to do that. But somehow I feel like when we get to the end, and we're sitting before God's judgment throne, I just don't know if it will really be what he's looking for us to say, you know what, I was kind of a jerk in life, but I kept the right day. I followed the commandments. Because I think when Jesus says that his remnant church are people, his remnant group of believers are people who follow his commands, I don't think he's just simply talking about the Decalogue, but he's talking about all of his commands. Does this mean that we keep them perfectly? We talked about this before. Jesus says, be ye perfect in this same sermon. This is be ye mature, right? There's a journey that we're on. This isn't to say that we arrive when we start following Jesus, but we allow his word to challenge us. We hear them, and we go off and we allow them to conform our lives. Like James says, when we look at God's law, if we choose not to do it, it's like looking in a mirror, seeing the spinach in your teeth, and then doing nothing about it. You allow the information to change the way you live. There's a devotional by a pastor. His name is Skye Jethani, and it's called Daily Devotional. But the subtitle is something along the lines of the devotional for people who hate devotionals. So if you hate devotionals, this is where to go to. But he tells a story in one of the devotions that resonates to me. He says this. He says, several years ago, I taught a class at my church on the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' most famous message, which contains many of our faith's most important ethical teachings. On the first day of class, after reading the full sermon together, I asked the students, how many of you think Jesus actually expects us to live out these commands? No one raised their hand. I was surprised, so I dug deeper. I asked, why shouldn't we take the Sermon on the Mount seriously? It's impossible to obey, one person said. No one can live like this. Jesus was just showing how we all need God's grace, another student shared. He was illustrating what a perfect life looks like and how none of us actually attain it. In their view, Jesus must have preached this sermon while frequently winking at his disciples to communicate, don't worry, you don't have to take any of this seriously. I think there's some truth to that. Like sometimes we blow by the things that Jesus says, and we don't let them sit and resonate deep to change us inside. But he makes this clear. The person who's wise, the person who's able to weather the storm, is the one who listens to his commands and then is willing to allow them to impact their lives. Storms will come, storms will go. I don't know what your week has looked like or what next week's going to look like, but I do know one thing is that regardless of what you have in your life, if you want to have stability, if you want to feel like there's some kind of security, if you want to feel like your life is stable and it's not moving in any direction but simply closer to God, start by taking these steps. Start by allowing his words to impact you. Maybe for you that first step is spending more time knowing what his words are. Maybe for you, you've realized that you've spent most of your life just sort of like hearing tidbits, like catching a little glimpse in a small little devotional or hearing a sermon from time to time or opening up a Sabbath school, but maybe you need to spend more time just sitting there and reading through the gospel and hearing what his words actually are for your life. Maybe for you, you've done that a lot, but you haven't actually taken the step of applying his word. Thinking about how would it look like to actually live what he told me to do and start allowing him to influence your life. Whatever the step is for you, willing to take one step closer. And I guarantee you, whatever storm you have, either now or in the future, will look different that way. Let's pray. God, may we find a way to be unshakable in our faith by being connected to you. May that connection be the way that we listen to you. May that connection be the way that we live out your words. May that connection be by taking you seriously and not just sweeping you under some rug. And then in return, God, as we find our security in you, may no storm ever shake us, we pray. In your name, amen.